This is the last photo of the Miller family, taken just 30 minutes before their apartment building was destroyed in one of New York's deadliest residential gas explosions. Imagine, a typical Sunday dinner turned into a devastating tragedy that would change gas safety regulations forever. The Miller family, Jacob, Anna, and their 3 children, David, Sarah, and little Rebecca, had moved to the Bronx from the Lower East Side in 1927. Jacob, 42, worked as a tailor in a shop on Jerome Avenue, saving every penny to provide his family with a better life in their new apartment building on Grand Concourse. Anna, 39, was known in the neighborhood for her warm personality and delicious Sunday meals that brought the family together each week. On that fateful Sunday, December 14, 1930, the Millers had invited Anna's sister Clara and her husband Sam for dinner. The weather had turned bitterly cold, and Jacob had turned up their gas heater to keep the apartment warm. What none of them realized was that the building's outdated gas pipes, installed when the structure was built in 1915, had been slowly corroding. The harsh winter had caused further expansion and contraction of the metal, creating microscopic cracks in the pipes running behind the walls. Earlier that day, several tenants had complained about a faint gas smell in the hallways, but the building superintendent had merely opened a few windows, assuming the cold weather would disperse any leaking gas. In 1930, gas utility companies added minimal odorants to natural gas, far less potent than today's standards, making small leaks difficult to detect. The Millers' neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor Goldstein, would later tell investigators that she had knocked on their door around 6:15 p.m., asking if they smelled anything unusual. Jacob had reassured her it was probably just the smell of Anna's cooking. This brief conversation was one of the last known interactions with the family while they were all still alive. At approximately 6:30 p.m., Clara took a photo of the family gathered around their dining table. The black and white image shows Jacob at the head of the table, carving a roast, with Anna beside him, smiling at the camera. The children are seated neatly in their Sunday best, with 4-year-old Rebecca clutching her favorite stuffed bear. No one in the image appears concerned or aware of the invisible danger accumulating in their walls. According to the subsequent investigation by the New York City Fire Department, gas had been steadily filling the space between the walls. The apartment's gas heater had a small flame that acted as the ignition source. At precisely 7:03 p.m., the concentration of gas reached its explosive threshold. Residents from blocks away reported hearing a thunderous boom that shook the entire neighborhood. The explosion was so powerful it collapsed the entire eastern wall of the apartment building. Bricks, furniture, and personal belongings were blasted across Grand Concourse. Mrs. Goldstein, who had been preparing to leave her apartment for her sister's home, was thrown against her kitchen wall but miraculously survived with only a broken arm and lacerations. The Miller family wasn't so fortunate. First responders arrived within minutes, but the devastation was catastrophic. Jacob and Anna were found amid the rubble of what had been their dining room. Both had died instantly from the blast. Clara and Sam Rosenberg had been seated closest to the exterior wall and suffered the worst injuries. Both died en route to Fordham Hospital. The fate of the Miller children became the tragedy's most heart-wrenching chapter. David, the oldest at 12, was found protecting his sisters. He had somehow managed to shield them with his body as the explosion tore through their home. Despite his efforts, Sarah, 8, died from her injuries later that night. David suffered severe burns and lung damage from inhaling superheated gas, but clung to life for 3 days before succumbing to his injuries. In a twist that captivated the city's attention, little Rebecca was found unconscious but alive, still clutching her teddy bear. The stuffed toy had somehow absorbed much of the blast impact. Rebecca was rushed to Fordham Hospital, where doctors worked tirelessly to save her life. After spending weeks in recovery, she was eventually placed in the care of her maternal grandmother, becoming the sole survivor of the Miller family. The investigation that followed revealed a shocking truth that would change how New York City approached gas safety. The building's gas pipes hadn't been inspected since installation, despite a city ordinance requiring checks every 5 years. The building owner, Maxwell Properties, had repeatedly deferred maintenance to save costs during the early years of the Great Depression. Perhaps most disturbing was the discovery that the gas company had received 3 reports of gas odors from the building in the weeks preceding the explosion, but had only performed cursory checks without proper equipment. The company had marked the complaints as resolved, despite never identifying the source of the leak. The tragedy sparked public outrage and led to immediate calls for stricter regulations. The New York Times ran front-page coverage for days, with one headline reading, "Miller Family Tragedy Exposes Deadly Negligence." Within months, the City Council passed what became known as the Miller Act, requiring more frequent inspections, better odorants in gas supplies, and mandatory installation of early gas detection systems in all residential buildings over 3 stories. The explosion's aftermath revealed another disturbing detail. The Miller family had written a letter to the building management just 2 weeks prior, mentioning a persistent gas smell near their kitchen stove. The letter was found in the building superintendent's office, unopened. Today, gas safety protocols in New York City are among the strictest in the nation, with modern regulations requiring immediate response to any reported gas odors. Yet few remember that these protocols exist largely because of the Miller family's tragic end on that cold December evening in 1930. The teddy bear that saved little Rebecca's life now sits in the New York City Fire Museum as a somber reminder of the disaster. Rebecca Miller Goldstein, who died in 2001 at age 75, spent her life advocating for gas safety regulations and visited schools throughout New York to tell her family's story, ensuring that their tragic end served to protect future generations. This is the last photo of Samuel Wilson, just 15 minutes before the 3rd floor of the Allied Garment Factory in Harlem collapsed beneath his feet. Imagine, as he guided military uniform fabric through his sewing machine, he had no idea that weakened support beams were seconds away from giving way, sending him and 23 other workers plummeting through splintered wood and twisted metal to their deaths. Samuel arrived in Harlem from South Carolina in 1941, part of the Great Migration of Black Americans seeking opportunity in northern cities. At 45, he was older than most new factory workers, but his steady hands and previous experience as a tailor made him valuable in the wartime rush. The Allied Garment Factory had been hastily converted from a warehouse to meet the skyrocketing demand for military uniforms after Pearl Harbor. That fateful morning of October 12, 1942, Samuel kissed his wife Ella goodbye in their small apartment on West 125th Street. "Just 1 more week of overtime," he promised. "Then we'll have enough saved for Willie's school books." Their 17-year-old son Willie had dreams of becoming a doctor, and Samuel was determined to make it possible. The family portrait on Samuel's workbench showed his pride. Ella, Willie, and their 14-year-old daughter Ruby smiling back at him through all the long hours. The factory floor that morning was alive with the rhythmic clatter of 60 sewing machines. The building, constructed in 1898, had originally been a furniture warehouse before being hastily retrofitted for garment production in early 1942. What few knew was that the building inspector had flagged structural concerns 3 months prior. The floor joists, never designed for the weight of industrial sewing equipment, had begun to show signs of stress. Factory owner Harold Greenberg had requested an extension on repairs, citing wartime material shortages. At precisely 10:17 a.m., Samuel's co-worker Judith Klein heard an ominous crack from overhead. It sounded like a gunshot, she would later tell federal investigators. Samuel looked up from his machine for just a moment, then went right back to work. We were all under pressure to meet quotas. The foreman had been pacing the floor that morning, reminding workers that the Army was waiting on their shipment of uniform jackets. The first warning came from Irene Davis, who operated a machine near the center of the floor. "The floor is moving!" she screamed, jumping from her seat. But her warning came too late. With a thunderous roar, a 40-foot section of the 3rd floor collapsed, dropping Samuel and 23 other workers onto the second floor, which immediately gave way under the combined weight, sending the victims crashing to the ground level amid a cloud of dust and debris. The collapse triggered the building's electrical system to short-circuit, igniting fabric scraps and triggering a small fire that filled the building with smoke. First responders arrived within minutes, but recovery was hampered by unstable debris. Firefighter Joseph Morelli would later describe the scene. "We could hear the moaning from under the rubble. People were alive in there, but we couldn't reach them fast enough." Of the 24 workers caught in the collapse, 17 died at the scene, including Samuel Wilson. 7 others were pulled from the rubble with severe injuries, though 3 would later die in the hospital. The youngest victim was just 16 years old, a girl named Maria Constantino, who had lied about her age to secure work supporting her immigrant family. The investigation that followed revealed critical structural failures. The building, hastily converted for war production, had never been properly reinforced to handle the weight and vibration of industrial machinery. More damning was the discovery that owner Harold Greenberg had received multiple warnings about potential structural issues, but had postponed repairs, citing the national emergency and material shortages as justification. What few knew at the time was that Samuel had noticed problems himself. His wife Ella later shared a chilling detail with investigators. "The night before, Samuel told me his machine was vibrating something terrible. The whole floor shook when all the machines were running. He was going to talk to the foreman about it, but was afraid of losing his job." In a cruel twist of fate, 3 hours after the collapse, a telegram arrived at the factory addressed to Samuel Wilson. His son Willie had been accepted into a special pre-medical program at Howard University with a partial scholarship. The telegram, recovered from the rubble, was delivered to Ella by a solemn-faced police officer that evening. The tragedy led to significant changes in New York's building codes and wartime factory safety regulations. The War Production Board issued new guidelines for converting existing structures for industrial use, and emergency safety inspections were ordered for similar facilities nationwide. For the families of Harlem, the Allied garment factory collapse became a rallying point. Local union organizer A. Philip Randolph used the disaster to push for better working conditions for black factory workers, highlighting how wartime pressures had led to compromised safety standards in predominantly minority neighborhoods. Today, a small memorial plaque on West 128th Street marks the location of the disaster. Each year on October 12th, descendants of the victims gather to remember those lost to wartime industrial haste and neglect. As Ella Wilson told the Amsterdam News in a 1962 interview, "Samuel died making uniforms for American soldiers who were fighting for freedom abroad. But that day taught us we still needed to fight for basic safety at home." This is the last photo of Evelyn Kowalski, taken just 45 minutes before the tragedy that would shock Brooklyn. Imagine a bright winter morning in 1955, snow falling gently outside classroom windows, while inside, a 10-year-old girl smiles for what would become her final portrait. Evelyn was born to Polish immigrants Stanislaw and Helena Kowalski in 1945, just as World War II was ending. The eldest of 3 children, she lived in a modest apartment in the Greenpoint neighborhood of Brooklyn, a tight-knit community of working-class families. Her father worked at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, while her mother sewed clothes at a local garment factory. Teachers at Public School 126 described Evelyn as exceptionally bright and curious. She excelled at mathematics and dreamed of becoming a teacher herself one day. That morning, January 14, 1955, began like any other winter school day. Her mother had braided her dark hair and dressed her warmly in a new wool coat, a Christmas gift from her grandparents. At 8:15 a.m., she kissed her mother goodbye and walked the 3 blocks to school with her younger brother Stefan, age 8. The day's schedule included a special class photograph, as documented by the school's records. According to Evelyn's classmate, Maria Novak, interviewed by the Brooklyn Daily Eagle the following day, Evelyn was so excited about the picture, she kept checking her hair in the reflection of the window. The class photo was scheduled for 10:30 a.m. on the first floor of the school building. What happened next has been pieced together from multiple witness accounts and the official police report. At approximately 11:15 a.m., after the class photographs were completed, Evelyn asked her teacher, Miss Harriet Fletcher, for permission to retrieve a book she had forgotten in the coat room on the school's fourth floor.
Miss Fletcher, distracted by organizing the students for their return to regular classes, granted permission without assigning a companion, a violation of school policy that would later become central to the investigation. School janitor Frank Morelli reported hearing footsteps on the stairs to the roof at approximately 11:20 a.m. "I didn't think much of it," he later testified. "Sometimes the older boys would sneak up there during lunch. I was heading up to check when I heard the scream." The brutal New York winter had left significant snowdrift accumulation on the school roof. According to the building inspector's report filed after the incident, the access door to the roof had a faulty locking mechanism that had been reported to the Board of Education on December 10, 1954, but was never repaired. The same report noted that the school's parapet wall, designed to prevent falls, stood only 30 inches high, 12 inches below the current safety requirements that would be implemented citywide following Evelyn's death. Reconstruction of events suggests that Evelyn, whether out of curiosity or by accident, accessed the unsecured roof door. Police photographs show a path of small footprints in the snow, leading to the eastern edge of the roof where the parapet was partially obscured by snowdrift, creating what investigators called a deceptive visual condition that may have caused Evelyn to misjudge the boundary of the roof. At 11:25 a.m., 3 witnesses on the street below, shopkeeper Harold Klein, housewife Dorothy Wilson, and mail carrier James Donovan, reported seeing a small figure fall from the school roof. Emergency services arrived within 7 minutes, but the injuries Evelyn sustained were catastrophic. She was pronounced dead at Brooklyn Jewish Hospital at 12:03 p.m. The subsequent investigation revealed a series of institutional failures. Beyond the faulty roof door and inadequate parapet height, the school had no protocol for accounting for students outside of their classrooms. The Board of Education had received multiple safety violation reports about PS 126 in the months leading up to the tragedy, but it allocated repair funds to newer schools in more affluent neighborhoods. The twist in this tragic story came 6 weeks after Evelyn's death, when an audit of school maintenance records revealed that repairs to the roof door had actually been funded and allegedly completed in November 1954. Maintenance supervisor Robert Caldwell was later indicted for falsifying records and misappropriating school repair funds. The criminal investigation uncovered a pattern of corruption that extended to multiple Brooklyn schools. In the aftermath, Evelyn's parents filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the city. The case, Kowalski v. New York City Board of Education, became a landmark in school safety law, establishing the precedent that schools have a special duty of care when supervising children. The settlement included funds for the Evelyn Kowalski School Safety Act, which mandated higher parapets, secured roof access, and strict student monitoring protocols across all city schools. Perhaps the most haunting legacy of this tragedy was found in Evelyn's school desk. When it was cleared out for her memorial service, teachers discovered a composition book with her final essay, titled, "What I Want to Be When I Grow Up." In it, she had written, "I want to be a teacher who makes schools better and safer for all children." Today, a small plaque commemorates Evelyn's life in the PS 126 library, renamed the Evelyn Kowalski Memorial Library in 1956. And on the roof, now secured by an 8-foot fence installed within months of her death, a weathered bouquet of flowers appears every January 14th, though no one knows who places it there. This is the last photo of Suzanne Hart, just 60 minutes before tragedy struck. Imagine a routine Tuesday morning in December, stepping into an elevator you've taken thousands of times, never suspecting it would become your steel coffin. Suzanne Hart was a vibrant 41-year-old advertising executive at Y&R, formerly Young & Rubicam, one of Manhattan's premier advertising agencies. Known for her keen creative instincts and warm personality, she'd worked her way up to become director of new business, content, and experience. Her colleagues described her as driven yet compassionate, a woman who balanced ambition with genuine kindness. That fateful morning of December 14, 2011, began like any other. Suzanne arrived at the 26-story office tower at 285 Madison Avenue near Grand Central Terminal, a historic 1920s building that had been Y&R's longtime home. She carried a coffee and briefcase, casually chatting with coworkers about upcoming holiday plans. Suzanne had just spoken with her father the night before, sharing exciting news about projects for the coming year. At approximately 9:55 a.m., elevator maintenance crews from Transil Elevator Inc. completed repairs on one of the building's 13 elevators. They had been working to address speed issues, requiring them to temporarily override a critical safety mechanism that prevented elevators from moving with doors open. At 9:56 a.m., just 1 minute after the maintenance team departed, Suzanne approached the first-floor elevator. Two colleagues had already entered the elevator car when Suzanne stepped forward to join them. What happened next occurred in mere seconds but would forever change multiple lives. As Suzanne crossed the threshold, her foot or leg became caught between the elevator and the lobby floor. Without warning, the elevator suddenly shot upward with its doors still open, violating fundamental safety protocols. The horrified colleagues inside watched helplessly as Suzanne was dragged upward. The tremendous force crushed her body between the elevator car and the shaft wall. The elevator continued its deadly ascent before becoming stuck between the first and second floors. The building erupted into chaos. Office workers described hearing screams and then rushing to the scene only to witness the gruesome aftermath. First responders arrived quickly, but could only confirm what everyone already feared. Suzanne Hart had died instantly from catastrophic injuries. Her two colleagues, though physically unharmed, were rushed to the hospital, suffering severe psychological trauma from witnessing the horrific accident. What makes this tragedy particularly devastating is its preventability. A subsequent investigation by the New York City Department of Buildings and Department of Investigation revealed a shocking disregard for basic safety protocols. The maintenance crew had disabled a critical safety mechanism during repairs, a device specifically designed to prevent elevators from moving with doors open, but failed to properly re-enable it before returning the elevator to service. The investigation uncovered that mechanic Michael Hill had bypassed the safety system using a jumper wire connected to the elevator's control panel. Though he claimed to have removed this bypass before the accident, investigators found evidence suggesting otherwise. A different wire discovered under the control panel's metal grate floor showed clear signs of recent use as a bypass device, contradicting Hill's account. Furthermore, the maintenance team violated city codes by failing to post warnings about the ongoing elevator work and neglecting to obtain proper authorization before returning the elevator to service. These violations created the perfect storm of circumstances that led to Suzanne's death. The tragedy sent shockwaves through New York City's business community and raised serious questions about elevator safety regulations. For Suzanne's family, the pain was immeasurable. Her father told reporters she was the most marvelous daughter imaginable, while her boyfriend was left devastated by the sudden loss of the woman he described simply as a beautiful person. Y&R CEO Peter Stringham issued a statement focusing on the well-being of the employee's family and our larger Young and Rubicam family, acknowledging the profound emotional impact on all who knew Suzanne and those who witnessed the accident. In the aftermath, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office reviewed the case for possible criminal charges, while the Buildings Department suspended the license of Transil Elevator co-owner John Fischera. All 5 mechanics involved were ultimately fired by Transil Elevator Inc. Building Commissioner Robert Lamandry didn't mince words, stating that these workers and their supervisors failed to follow the most basic safety procedures, and their carelessness cost a woman her life. This tragedy eventually contributed to strengthening elevator safety regulations throughout New York City. Years later, in 2020, New York State implemented the Elevator Safety Act, requiring all elevator mechanics to be licensed professionals with proper training, a requirement already standard in 36 other states. The law mandated stringent education programs, recognizing that elevators are sophisticated pieces of equipment that really take years and years of training to properly maintain. Today, a small memorial plaque in the building's lobby serves as a somber reminder of how routine maintenance failures can lead to catastrophic consequences.
Suzanne's story continues to be referenced in safety training programs throughout the industry, ensuring that her death was not entirely in vain. The next time you step into an elevator, consider this. Behind those sliding doors lies complex machinery that carries your life in its mechanisms. For Suzanne Hart, that trust was fatally betrayed by human error and negligence. A sobering reminder that sometimes the most dangerous moments occur during life's most mundane activities. This is the last photo taken of James Miller, just 15 minutes before the tragic accident at Coney Island's boardwalk in 1918. Imagine a smiling young man standing at the edge of America's playground, unaware that his life would change forever in mere minutes. James Miller was a 27-year-old factory worker from Brooklyn, recently returned from serving in World War I. After witnessing the horrors of trench warfare in France, James was eager to embrace life's simple pleasures back home. A devoted son to his widowed mother Martha, he had promised to build her a better life once the war ended. In early summer 1918, as New York began recovering from both the war and the Spanish flu pandemic, James decided to treat himself to a Sunday at Coney Island's famous boardwalk. The morning of June 16, 1918, dawned bright and clear. James put on his best suit, the same one he had worn when he returned from France, and carefully combed his hair. His mother recalled later that he seemed particularly cheerful that day, whistling as he prepared for his outing. "Be careful on those rides," she had cautioned, to which James had laughed and replied, "The Germans couldn't get me, Ma. I don't think a roller coaster will." By noon, James had joined the crowds flooding Coney Island. The boardwalk was especially packed that day, the first truly warm Sunday of the season. Newspaper reports estimated over 100,000 visitors had come to enjoy the attractions. James spent the early afternoon playing carnival games and watching the sideshows. At approximately 2:45 p.m., a fellow visitor snapped the now famous photograph of James standing on the boardwalk, the grand entrance to Steeplechase Park visible behind him. Just 15 minutes after this photo was taken, at around 3 p.m., James was walking along the boardwalk's edge, where construction work was underway to repair winter storm damage. According to witness statements collected by the Brooklyn Daily Eagle, a section of the wooden planking had been recently replaced but inadequately secured. As James stepped onto this section, several boards suddenly gave way beneath him. The drop was approximately 12 feet to the sand below, but James had the misfortune of falling directly onto a pile of construction materials. An iron support beam struck him in the spine, causing immediate paralysis from the waist down. Bystanders rushed to his aid, among them a vacationing doctor from Manhattan, who later told authorities that James remained conscious throughout the ordeal, repeatedly asking if he would be able to walk again. Emergency services arrived within 20 minutes, but the damage was catastrophic. James was transported to Coney Island Hospital, where doctors confirmed his spine had been severed. He would never walk again. The accident transformed a decorated war veteran into a paraplegic in an instant. What followed was a bitter legal battle that exposed serious negligence in the boardwalk's maintenance. City records revealed that the construction company had been cited twice in the previous month for safety violations, but had continued working without addressing the issues. The section where James fell had been marked as unsafe 3 days prior to the accident, but no barriers had been erected to prevent pedestrian access. The most shocking revelation came 6 months later during the court proceedings. Internal correspondence between the construction company and city officials showed that corners had been cut to save money, with substandard materials used for the boardwalk repairs.
The construction foreman had noted the dangerous condition of that specific section in a daily report, but had been instructed to continue work without additional safety measures. In the end, James was awarded a substantial settlement, though no amount of money could restore his mobility. The accident led to the first major overhaul of safety regulations for New York City's public recreational spaces. James Miller used part of his settlement to establish a foundation advocating for disabled veterans, many of whom, like himself, had survived the war only to face different battles at home. James lived until 1967, spending nearly 5 decades in a wheelchair. He never married, but devoted his life to advocacy work. In his memoirs, published in 1955, he wrote, "I often think about that photograph taken just before my fall. That smiling young man looking out at the ocean had no idea how quickly life can change. But neither did he know how much strength he possessed." The boardwalk accident of 1918 remains one of the earliest documented cases of public space negligence resulting in life-altering injury. James Miller's story became a rallying point for early disability rights advocates, and ultimately led to improved safety standards that would save countless lives in the decades to follow. This is the last photo of Joseph Miller taken just 35 minutes before the explosion that would claim his life. Imagine a skilled mechanic with grease-stained hands, unaware that the routine task he's about to perform will trigger a catastrophe that will change garage safety standards forever. Joseph Miller was not a man who courted danger. At 38, he had spent nearly half his life working on automobiles, first as an apprentice, and later opening his own small garage in the Jamaica neighborhood of Queens. Neighbors knew him as a reliable mechanic who could diagnose engine troubles by their sound alone. His wife Catherine often said Joe could hear a car's problems before the driver even noticed something was wrong. That summer afternoon of August 14, 1949, was oppressively hot. New York was experiencing a record heat wave, with temperatures climbing above 90 degrees for the 6th consecutive day. The heat transformed Miller's garage into a sweltering box, forcing Joseph to prop open the doors and set up an electric fan in a futile attempt to circulate the stifling air. He had been working since 7 a.m., already finishing 3 oil changes and a brake job before lunch. At 1:40 p.m., Catherine stopped by with a packed lunch and snapped a photo of Joseph with their new Kodak camera, a gift for their 10th anniversary the previous month. In the image, he smiles tiredly, leaning against a Buick he'd been servicing, wiping his brow with a rag. His blue work shirt is stained with oil and sweat, his sleeves rolled up past his elbows. "Don't work too hard in this heat," she cautioned before leaving. "I'll be home early," he promised. It was the last conversation they would have. After Catherine left, Joseph returned to his most challenging job of the day, repairing a fuel line on a 1946 Ford sedan. The car belonged to Frank Donovan, a regular customer who had complained about stalling issues. Joseph had diagnosed a clogged fuel filter and damage to the fuel line. Routine work for an experienced mechanic. At approximately 2:10 p.m., according to witness reports from neighboring businesses, Joseph began cleaning accumulated grime from the carburetor components. Following standard practice of the era, he was using gasoline as a cleaning solvent, a common but dangerous technique employed by mechanics throughout the country. He had placed the parts in a metal basin filled with gasoline to dissolve the built-up residue. What Joseph couldn't see was the invisible danger accumulating around him. In the enclosed space of the garage, even with doors open, gasoline vapors were pooling near the floor. The extreme heat of the day accelerated evaporation, creating a lethal concentration of fumes in the air. According to fire department records, the temperature inside the garage likely exceeded 100 degrees. At 2:15 p.m., Joseph reached for an electric drill to remove a stubborn bolt. This routine action, one he had performed thousands of times before, would prove fatal. The moment he triggered the drill, it produced a small electric spark, an almost imperceptible flash that ignited the concentrated gasoline vapors. Witnesses on the street described a sudden whoomp sound, followed by a tremendous blast that shattered windows along the block. The explosion originated near the workbench where Joseph had been standing and instantly engulfed the front section of the garage in flames. The fire spread rapidly, consuming the Ford sedan and reaching the garage's small office within seconds. Nicholas Romano, who owned the barbershop next door, was the first to reach the scene. "The heat was so intense I couldn't get close," he later told police officers. "I called for Joe, but heard nothing." The flames were already coming through the roof. The Queens Fire Department arrived within 7 minutes, but the garage had become an inferno. When firefighters finally managed to contain the blaze 40 minutes later, they found Joseph's body near his workbench. Medical examiner reports concluded he had died almost instantly from the initial blast. The investigation revealed a tragic confluence of factors that would later influence safety regulations throughout the automotive repair industry. The extreme heat, poor ventilation, use of gasoline as a cleaning agent, and the spark from an electrical tool had created perfect conditions for disaster. The Queens County Fire Marshal's report specifically noted the absence of proper ventilation systems and fire suppression equipment that might have prevented the tragedy. In the aftermath, Catherine Miller became an advocate for garage safety. Her persistent lobbying of local officials, alongside the fire marshal's recommendations, eventually contributed to new regulations requiring improved ventilation, proper storage of flammable liquids, and fire suppression systems in automotive repair facilities. By 1952, the New York City Council passed what some locally called Miller's Law, establishing strict safety standards for garages throughout the 5 boroughs. The explosion at Miller's garage wasn't the deadliest industrial accident of the era, but its impact on safety standards created a lasting legacy. Modern mechanics now work with non-flammable cleaning solvents, specialized ventilation systems, and extensive safety training that Joseph Miller never had. Each safety improvement, each life saved in the decades since, carries the invisible fingerprints of a Queens mechanic who simply wanted to fix one more car before heading home early to his wife. What makes Joseph's story particularly poignant is how preventable his death was. Had he known that gasoline vapors could travel along the floor, that they could accumulate in deadly concentrations even in a space with open doors, or that even a small spark could trigger catastrophe, he might have taken different precautions. But in 1949, such knowledge wasn't widely understood outside of industrial safety circles. Today, a small insurance office stands where Miller's garage once operated. Nothing marks the site of the explosion that changed safety standards. But in fire prevention courses and mechanic training programs across America, the basic lessons learned that August afternoon continue to save lives. This is the last photo of the Lockwood family, taken just 47 minutes before floodwaters from Hurricane Agnes claimed their lives. 3 generations smile in their newly renovated basement, unaware that Staten Island's outdated drainage system was about to fail catastrophically. On June 22, 1972, Hurricane Agnes made landfall near New York City after devastating the eastern seaboard. Though weakened from its peak, the storm brought unprecedented rainfall to Staten Island. The Lockwoods, Thomas, 42, Patricia, 39, and their 3 children, Robert, 17, Emily, 13, and Michael, 8, along with Thomas's parents Gerald, 68, and Eleanor, 65, had gathered in their westerly basement to prepare for what they thought would be a moderate storm. The Lockwoods had moved to Staten Island in 1965, drawn by affordable housing and proximity to Thomas's job at the shipyards. They purchased the modest 2-story home on a quiet street and spent years renovating it, finishing the basement just months before Agnes hit. That basement would become their tomb. Weather reports that morning drastically underestimated Agnes's potential impact on Staten Island. The borough's unique topography, sitting in a bowl-like depression with inadequate drainage, created perfect conditions for disaster. By afternoon, rainfall intensity had doubled forecasts, with over 9 inches falling in less than 6 hours. At 5:13 p.m., Thomas's mother Eleanor snapped what would become their final family photo. Thomas had just installed wood paneling, and the family posed proudly in front of it. Outside, water was already pooling in the street, but they felt safe. The Lockwoods had weathered storms before. By 5:45 p.m., water was seeping through the basement walls. Thomas called the emergency services, but lines were overwhelmed. Neighbors reported hearing the family attempting to move upstairs, but the rapidly rising water had already compromised the wooden staircase. At 6 p.m., witnesses described a catastrophic sound. The street-facing basement wall collapsing under pressure from the flood. Water rushed in at tremendous speed, filling the basement within minutes. The family had no time to escape. Rescue efforts didn't reach the Lockwood home until nearly midnight. By then, it was too late. All 7 family members were found in the basement, victims of drowning. First responders described a scene of horror. The family appeared to have been trying to stack furniture to climb toward a small window that would have been their only escape. The Lockwood tragedy wasn't an isolated incident. Hurricane Agnes claimed 128 lives across the eastern United States and caused over $3.1 billion in damages, equivalent to over $21 billion today. In New York alone, 24 people died, many in basement apartments and low-lying areas. What made the Lockwood case particularly devastating was how preventable it had been. Later investigations revealed that Staten Island's drainage system had been flagged for upgrades years earlier, but funding had been repeatedly delayed. The area's flood maps hadn't been updated since 1968 and failed to accurately reflect the risk to the Lockwood neighborhood. Following Agnes, New York City implemented sweeping changes to flood preparation and emergency response protocols. The Lockwood Act of 1973 mandated improved basement emergency exits and flood warning systems. Staten Island's drainage infrastructure underwent a $15 million overhaul, and FEMA created more accurate flood zone designations. Today, a small memorial plaque stands near the rebuilt Lockwood home, a reminder of 7 lives lost and lessons painfully learned. The current homeowners report that during heavy rains, they sometimes hear what sounds like a family's desperate calls for help, ghostly echoes of that terrible June evening when the waters came too quickly for escape. This is the last photograph of Professor James Harrison, taken just 20 minutes before the Temiskaming earthquake violently shook the eastern seaboard on November 1, 1935. Imagine, standing at a blackboard in Yonkers High School, chalk in hand, with absolutely no idea that in moments the floor beneath his feet would begin to tremble, and that his quick thinking would save 23 young lives. James Harrison never intended to be a hero that autumn day. At 45 years old, the mathematics teacher had spent nearly 2 decades molding young minds in Yonkers, New York. A quiet widower who had lost his wife to tuberculosis in 1929, Harrison found purpose in education. Students respected his stern but fair approach, his meticulous attention to equations, and his vintage pocket watch that kept precise time for every lesson. That Friday morning began like any other. Harrison arrived at school early, arranging geometric models on his desk while sipping his usual black coffee. The weather was unseasonably warm for November, and several windows in his second-floor classroom were cracked open, allowing a gentle breeze to rustle papers as students filed in for their 12:45 p.m. advanced algebra class. School photographs from that semester show Harrison always dressed formally, a 3-piece suit, neatly pressed, with his signature bow tie. Former student Margaret Denton would later recall, Professor Harrison was old school. He believed presentation mattered, in mathematics and in life. The classroom photograph taken that morning shows him pointing to a complex equation, sleeves rolled up slightly, a rare casual gesture for the typically formal instructor. At precisely 1:03 p.m., as Harrison was explaining logarithmic functions, the first tremors began. Initially, most thought it was simply a heavy truck passing by. Yonkers was growing rapidly in the 1930s, with construction projects throughout the city. But Harrison, who had experienced a minor earthquake during a trip to California in 1925, recognized the distinctive vibration immediately. As ceiling plaster began to crack and light fixtures swayed, panic erupted. According to student accounts, documented in the Yonkers Herald-Statesman days later, Harrison's voice cut through the chaos with unusual authority. "Remain calm," he instructed. "Under your desks immediately." His commanding presence quelled the rising panic as the tremors intensified. What happened next demonstrates how split-second decisions can determine life and death during natural disasters. While other teachers in the building rushed their students toward staircases, the standard evacuation procedure at the time, Harrison barred his classroom door. "The stairs are the most dangerous place during an earthquake," he reportedly told his frightened students. This decision, unorthodox at the time but now standard earthquake protocol, would prove critical. In the adjacent hallway, a section of ceiling collapsed onto the corridor, blocking the main evacuation route and injuring 2 students and a teacher who had fled their classroom. Harrison's students remained sheltered under solid oak desks as bookshelves toppled and windows shattered. The violent shaking lasted approximately 45 seconds, but to those experiencing it, time seemed suspended. When the primary tremors subsided, Harrison methodically led his students to safety, instructing them to cover their heads with textbooks as they navigated debris-strewn hallways. He conducted a head count in the schoolyard, ensuring all 23 students from his class were accounted for. Photographs from local newspapers show shocked students huddled together as dust-covered Harrison continued to maintain order. A lesser-known detail emerges from school board records. Just 3 weeks prior, Harrison had attended a faculty meeting where he questioned the school's emergency protocols. Having read about recent earthquakes in Montana, he suggested revisions to evacuation procedures. His concerns were noted, but tabled for future discussion. This foresight, dismissed at the time, proved prophetic. The earthquake, later determined to have been centered in the Temiskaming region of Quebec, with a magnitude of 6.2, was felt across the northeastern United States and eastern Canada. While Yonkers suffered minimal structural damage compared to areas closer to the epicenter, the psychological impact was significant. School was canceled for 3 days as engineers assessed building safety. Harrison's classroom sustained considerable damage: shattered windows, toppled bookshelves, and a large crack running diagonally across the ceiling. Yet remarkably, not a single student under his care suffered more than minor scratches. In contrast, across the region, falling debris caused numerous injuries and even several fatalities. What makes this story particularly compelling is what happened after the earthquake. Harrison's quick thinking and unconventional decision to shelter in place rather than evacuate immediately led to changes in school safety protocols throughout Westchester County. His detailed report to the school board, preserved in municipal archives, became the foundation for revised earthquake procedures that emphasized assessment before evacuation. In a tragic twist that few could have predicted, Harrison himself would not live to see these changes fully implemented. Just 7 months after the earthquake, while helping to repair lingering structural damage to the school gymnasium, damage initially overlooked in hasty post-earthquake inspections, Harrison suffered a fatal heart attack. His death certificate, filed in Westchester County records, lists cardiac failure as the cause. But colleagues suggested the stress of the earthquake and its aftermath had taken a toll on his health. The photograph that opens our story, Harrison at the blackboard, chalk in hand, 20 minutes before the earth shook, hung in the Yonkers High School mathematics department until the building was renovated in 1968. For generations of students who never knew him, his story became legend, a reminder that heroism often emerges from ordinary people making extraordinary decisions in moments of crisis. Today, a small plaque in the rebuilt Yonkers High School commemorates Harrison's actions, easily overlooked amid trophy cases and student artwork. But earthquake preparedness drills conducted in schools throughout the region carry his legacy forward, saving countless lives in subsequent seismic events. As we reflect on this largely forgotten moment in history, perhaps the most poignant detail comes from student Margaret Denton's diary, discovered decades later during a family estate sale. On the evening of November 1st, 1935, she wrote, "The earth shook today. Everything changed in an instant. Professor Harrison knew exactly what to do when no one else did." I wonder if we truly appreciate those who prepare for disasters that haven't happened yet. This is the last photo of Richard Novak, taken just 48 minutes before disaster struck on January 22nd, 1951. Imagine a 38-year-old traveling salesman smiling at the hotel bar, completely unaware that the next hour would seal his fate, becoming one of the forgotten victims of a Buffalo winter storm that history barely remembers. In January 1951, Buffalo was experiencing one of its coldest winters on record. Richard Novak, a successful pharmaceutical sales representative from Pittsburgh, had traveled to Buffalo for a 3-day business conference at the prestigious Statler Hotel downtown. As a veteran road warrior who frequently traveled throughout the Northeast, Novak was no stranger to winter weather. But what was about to unfold would challenge even the most experienced traveler. The morning of January 22nd began relatively calm, with light snowfall and temperatures hovering around 20 degrees Fahrenheit. The National Weather Service had issued a winter storm warning, but like many Buffalo residents and visitors who had grown accustomed to such alerts, few anticipated the severity of what was coming. Novak spent the morning in meetings with potential clients from Buffalo General Hospital, discussing the latest medications his company had developed. By noon, conditions had deteriorated rapidly. The temperature plummeted to 5 degrees Fahrenheit, and wind gusts reached 45 miles per hour, creating dangerous whiteout conditions. Lake-effect snow began accumulating at a rate of 2 to 3 inches per hour. Most businesses started closing early, and the conference organizers announced they would postpone the afternoon sessions. Rather than remain in his room, Novak decided to head to the hotel's popular bar and restaurant, where he ordered lunch and a whiskey to warm himself. Another hotel guest snapped a photo of Novak sitting at the bar, appearing relaxed and unconcerned as he watched the storm intensify through the window. He chatted with other stranded guests and called his wife back in Pittsburgh to assure her he was safe at the hotel and would extend his stay if necessary. At approximately 3:15 p.m., the power at the Statler Hotel flickered and then went out completely. The hotel's emergency generators kicked in, but they only provided limited electricity to essential areas. The heating system struggled to maintain temperature as the bitter cold and fierce winds assaulted the building. Hotel staff distributed extra blankets and moved guests to the main lobby, where a large fireplace became the center of activity. What happened next remains the subject of debate among those who survived that day. According to witness statements, Novak became increasingly concerned about his company car, a new 1951 Buick, parked in an unsecured lot across the street. Despite multiple warnings from hotel staff and other guests, Novak insisted he needed to check on the vehicle and retrieve important samples and documents from the trunk. At 4:03 p.m., wearing only his business suit and overcoat, Novak left the relative safety of the hotel. Security footage captured him struggling against the wind as he exited the lobby. It was the last time anyone saw him alive. The blizzard raged through the night, dropping nearly 30 inches of snow on Buffalo by morning. When conditions improved slightly the following day, emergency crews began the grim task of searching for those who had become trapped or lost. On January 24th, a snowplow operator discovered Novak's body less than 200 feet from the hotel entrance. He had apparently become disoriented in the whiteout conditions, missed the parking lot entirely, and collapsed from exposure to the extreme cold. The medical examiner later determined he had suffered cardiac arrest brought on by hypothermia. The temperature that night had dropped to -11 degrees Fahrenheit, with a wind chill approaching -40 degrees Fahrenheit.
What makes Novak's story particularly tragic is that he left behind a wife and two young daughters, ages 7 and 9. According to newspaper accounts, he had called home just 45 minutes before making his fateful decision to venture outside. His wife would later tell investigators that he had mentioned being concerned about important medication samples that needed to be refrigerated, suggesting he felt a professional obligation to retrieve them despite the obvious danger. The January storm of 1951 claimed 6 lives in Buffalo. But while other weather events, like the famous blizzard of '77, have been extensively documented, this deadly storm has largely faded from public memory. Richard Novak's story serves as a stark reminder of how quickly winter conditions can become life-threatening, even in a city accustomed to harsh weather. The Statler Hotel would later implement stricter emergency protocols, including prohibiting guests from leaving during severe weather conditions and improving secure storage options for travelers with valuable items. Weather forecasting also improved in the years following, giving residents and visitors more accurate warnings about impending storms. Yet for the Novak family, these changes came too late. A simple decision, the kind made every day without consequence, cost a husband and father his life, transforming a routine business trip into a permanent absence. As we reflect on Buffalo's long history with winter storms, Richard Novak's story reminds us that behind the statistics and weather records are real people, whose lives can change in an instant when nature unleashes its full fury. This is the last photo of Timothy Collins just 15 minutes before the tragic accident that would claim his life at Rochester's RKO Palace Theater. Imagine sitting in a crowded movie theater, laughing with friends, completely unaware that, in moments, your life would be forever changed by a single misstep in the darkness. On the evening of October 12, 1960, 17-year-old Timothy Collins was like any other teenager in Rochester, New York, a junior at West High School with dreams of studying engineering at the University of Rochester. Tim was known for his quick wit and kind demeanor. The second son of Robert Collins, a machinist at Eastman Kodak, and Margaret Collins, a homemaker, Tim had a bright future ahead. His older brother James was already in his first year at college, and Tim was determined to follow in his footsteps. That Wednesday evening started like any other. Tim and 3 friends decided to catch the evening showing of The Magnificent Seven at the RKO Palace Theater on Clinton Avenue. The ornate theater, built in 1928, was a downtown landmark with its grand neo-Georgian architecture, crystal chandeliers, and imposing balcony that gave patrons a perfect view of the silver screen below. The friends arrived early, purchased their tickets for 85 cents each, and made their way up the twin staircases to the balcony where tickets were cheaper and privacy greater. A perfect spot for teenagers looking for independence. As they settled into their seats in the back row of the balcony, Tim posed for a photo that his friend Jerry took with his new Kodak Brownie camera. The image captured Tim smiling, the screen's glow illuminating his face, completely unaware of what would happen next. The theater was only half full that night, a common sight as downtown theaters had begun losing patrons to television and suburban theaters. By 1960, the once thriving RKO Palace was already showing signs of age and neglect. Maintenance had been deferred as profits dwindled, a fact that would later become central to the investigation. About midway through the film, Tim left his seat to go to the restroom. According to witnesses, what happened next occurred in mere seconds. As Tim navigated the darkened aisle along the back of the balcony, he apparently lost his footing near a section where the balcony railing was later found to be loose. Jerry Miller, who was seated closest to Tim, would later tell police he heard a sudden scraping sound, followed by a startled cry. One minute he was there, the next he was gone, Miller told the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle the next day. It happened so fast I couldn't even reach for him. Tim fell approximately 40 feet from the balcony to the orchestra section below. The sound of his fall caused immediate panic in the theater. The film stopped, and lights came on as screams echoed throughout the ornate hall. 2 doctors who happened to be in attendance rushed to his aid, but their efforts were in vain. Timothy Collins was pronounced dead at the scene from severe head trauma and internal injuries. The investigation that followed revealed troubling details about the state of the theater. City building inspectors found that the section of balcony railing where Tim fell had deteriorated fasteners that had worked loose over years of use. Theater management had been cited twice in the previous year for various code violations, though none specifically mentioned the balcony railing. The tragedy sent shockwaves through Rochester. Within days, the city ordered emergency inspections of all theaters with balconies. The Rochester Times-Union ran a front-page story questioning the safety of aging entertainment venues throughout the city. Timothy's parents filed a lawsuit against RKO Theaters, which was eventually settled out of court for an undisclosed sum. In a twist that would later be seen as darkly prophetic, the RKO Palace Theater would survive only a few more years. Declining attendance and mounting maintenance costs led to its closure in August 1965. The once magnificent theater was demolished later that year to make way for planned development that never materialized. For many years, nothing marked the site but a parking lot, erasing the physical reminder of the tragedy that had occurred there. What made Tim's death particularly poignant was how preventable it was. The subsequent investigation revealed that theater management had deferred maintenance on the balcony railings despite warnings from their own maintenance staff. Internal memos uncovered during the lawsuit showed that repairs had been scheduled but repeatedly postponed due to budget constraints, a cost-cutting measure that ultimately cost a young man his life. For Timothy's family, the loss was devastating. His mother, Margaret, never fully recovered from the shock, according to family friends. His father, Robert, became an advocate for stricter enforcement of building codes in public venues. At the funeral, Timothy's brother James spoke of how Tim had been excitedly discussing college applications just days before the accident. The city of Rochester changed its building inspection protocols following the incident, implementing more frequent safety checks for entertainment venues. The Collins family established a small scholarship in Timothy's name at West High School, awarded annually to a promising engineering student. A way to keep alive the dreams that Tim never had the chance to pursue. Today, few Rochester residents remember the tragic accident at the RKO Palace Theater. The site where the theater once stood now houses modern development, with no plaque or marker to commemorate what happened there on that October evening in 1960. Yet for the Collins family and those who were present that night, the memory of Tim's fall remains. A stark reminder of how a moment's negligence can forever alter lives.